Hey guys, the Maid of Orleans, the Maid of Orleans. Honestly, I say it both ways. I figure people are gonna read it like Maid of Orleans most of the time, so that's just what I say. But so you're aware, Maid of Orleans is more the right pronunciation. Frankly, I may not even be doing it right, but it's French. You get the idea. It's kind of like Les Mis, a lot of letters that you're not pronouncing. Anyway, I wanted to run through some of the storyboard of the album because how I made this album, it does essentially run kind of like a storyboard. Like I'll do a lot of research uh, to read up on the story, get an idea of where the moments are, if that makes sense, to kind of inspire some music. So I guess you could say I got little bullet points along the story. Because obviously, even just these 32 tracks I have, it's nowhere near covering the full range of potential story to tell. But as an artist, especially when you're trying to interpret a historical story, you got to kind of figure out where the highlights are in the story you want to tell. So I'm just going to go over some of those highlights right now and kind of give you some of my thought process as we run through these tracks. And I'll make sure to post the track titles down in the description so you'll be able to follow along and see where I am at. But yeah, I'm really excited for this release. It comes out on Friday, so we're literally like 2 days away. It should be up on YouTube right away, Spotify, iTunes, things like that. I think with Pandora, I'll have to go through an additional step because they do things a little differently there. But then it'll be up and running since I know I'm in with the in crowd there. They kind of thumbs up or thumbs down you. But once you're in, they're usually pretty good about streamlining your content. But sometimes that takes a week, maybe two in some cases. But anyway, let's run through this a bit. So we got track one, A Contest of Kings. What I wanted to reflect here was a bit more of an overview, I guess you can say, because you can see that the very next track is 100 Years' War. So this was a conflict that was going a long time, and you'd learn a lot more about it reading the history than hearing any poor recitation on my part. But the idea is you have these territories in Europe that are at conflict, right? You have I guess you can say the prospect of England taking over the territories, and it's a question or not of whether, I guess, the nation of France would exist at all. So you got to realize that the scope of the conflict going on very much decided the existence of France. France would not have existed if they lost the Hundred Years' War, and it went a long time. So obviously that goes outside of Joan of Arc's lifetime even. So there was conflict before she was born. There was conflict still 22 years after she had died. I think, was it 22 years? I know there's a track later called 22 Years Gone, and that's kind of a reference to that. It's like a 22-year montage of Joan of Arc dies, and then the conflict still rages on, eventually resulting in France being victorious. But yeah, it was a very long conflict. So A Contest of Kings is reflecting that. Musical chairs, I guess you could say. The powers and principalities duking it out. 100 Years' War. That is a shorter track than Contest of Kings. Contest of Kings is a 5-minute track, whereas 100 Years' War is only a 2-minute track. Contest of Kings has like choir strings and stuff like that. It's got a more epic overall thing, whereas 100 Years' War, we're just kind of gliding into the fact that this conflict is so long, and just all these things going on. So that's just kind of low strings and stuff with like a melody that I enjoyed kind of putting together where I went ahead and did it. You can decide for yourself whether that was a good decision or not. Treaty of Troyes is a key moment in this conflict. But that basically is a reference to the Treaty of Troyes. This was essentially where the crown was promised to, and forgive my paraphrasing, the crown to the throne of France, soon to be, was promised to the English, to the English king and stuff. So basically, I forget the name, but it was the queen at the time after her husband had died. Instead of her passing it on to her sons, she basically promised it to England. And so this was I guess you can say, a key point in the conflict because this is where the Dauphin and like all these other characters are kind of branching out, saying, "Nope, Mom did a no-no, and we're gonna dispute it." So the idea is Tree of Troy, as we're pointing at, you know, the storm is raging kind of thing. And you got like some choir, things like that, things moving around. You can see that it's a revision of the price of influence. I thought that was kind of fitting, since the price of influence is kind of the implication that no good deed unpunished, or you could say any influence you have on a big picture is going to have big rebuttal. So that was kind of the thinking there. And then we go Blossom and Lorraine. That comes in to Joan, Jehanne, if I pronounce it right, Jehanne. It's basically the medieval version of Jean, but it's like Jeanne, not Jean, like Jeanne. Um, but I could be mistaken in that. I'm not a scholar on these things, but I got the spelling right. You can see later. But A Blossom and Lorraine. This is a piano track. It's really pretty. It's one that I've actually had for a while. Like I did finishing touches to it and stuff, but the main melody, like I've been sitting on that since I was like 15 or something. But it's a melody I've always liked, and I wanted it to be used in the right context, and I felt this was really fitting. But Blossom and Lorraine, this is a reference to where Joan of Arc is born. And the idea is you have this conflict raging, and here is this girl that is going to have influence in the time to come. So that's a little homage to her, there being some hope. And then we go into the Messengers, which is referencing angelic visitation to Jeanne. I don't even know if I'm pronouncing that right. Forgive me. It went a little different because I had a few choices. I could make it more personal. I could kind of go case by case, but I didn't want this album to be terribly long, and so I had to choose which moments I wanted to focus on more. So for the Messengers, it sufficed me to take kind of an overview focus that I guess you could say God was an influence to be accounted for. You have the affairs of men raging, but there's another influence in play, and that influence is reaching out to make Joan a part of that. So that's what Messengers kind of does. So it takes like a different tone than maybe you would guess by reading it, because then we immediately jump into Jehanne's Crusade, which is her committing to hearkening to the influences she's receiving. So then she's going to go out to convince the Dauphin. I don't even know if I'm pronouncing any of this right, so just bear with me. And then we go into Before the Royal Court. I guess you can say this is an homage to the politics of the situation. She's now got to go before these people that are somebodies. She's a nobody, and then we go into A Girl's Revelation. This is her, sharing her experience and stuff, and they got to decide what to do with that. Then we go to the Dauphin's Gamble. That is kind of the moment of truth. The case has been made. The Dauphin he's in a bad spot. Like, that's an important thing to note in the history, is they've just been losing this entire time in this conflict. And at this point, the Dauphin is fairly desperate. So whether he believed her or not, I think he was responsive to her zeal, so to speak. It was, well, she's confident, let's just send her out there and see what happens. But this is his gamble, right? Because he's committing his armies to act on this influence, so to speak. I apologize, the camera's shaking, my arm's tired. So that's what that is. And then we go into the Siege of Orleans, the Inquisition of Jehanne revised. This was kind of cool because the Inquisition of Jehanne is when she's being interviewed by inquisitors. She's having her court basically declaring her a heretic and stuff like that. So I thought Siege of Orleans being a revision of that was fitting because it's conflict. They both sound different. Siege of Orleans has more of, there's choir use. You get a feel that stuff is happening, and it was just worked out really good that way. Whereas the Inquisition of Jehanne does not use choir, but it's like more like orchestral. You get more like, I guess you could say, brass kind of undertones and stuff, and you'll see what that's about. We then go into the Quiver's Kiss, which is kind of a muffled piano sound. This is a reference to her being shot with an arrow. So you gotta understand, when she showed up to Orleans, she was very much, get him, we gotta get him, we're gonna charge the lines, and then it doesn't quite work out right away. What happens is she gets shot with an arrow and then gets dragged off the battlefield. So this song is kind of the shell shock vibe of, oh crap, I've been shot. I just kind of thought things were going to happen because God told me to, right? And then she's kind of bashed in the face, I guess you can say, to say, oh, wow, this is going to be a lot of work. So that happens. And in this moment is kind of her deciding factor of a deciding moment where she can either tuck tail and run or seize the moment and seek to bring about the results that she felt inspired to achieve. It's thinking, okay, well, if there's anything to this, it's the time to show it. So then we go from that to Banner Unfurled, because basically Joan, she escaped her medical tent. They drug her off the battlefield, they patched her up, and they were pretty much like, you're done, you're out and stuff, because she was a bannerman. It wasn't like she was doing any fighting, but she had her banner and was there to rally the troops and stuff. So then she unfurls her banner after escaping, goes back to the battlefield, because morale was obviously bad when she got drug off. People were responsive to Joan, and this was kind of the moment she made herself an icon, I guess you can say. She unfurls her banner, they attack. There was logistical planning in this, by the way. I forget how the battle played out exactly, but the idea is pretty straightforward. She gets taken out of the equation with an arrow for a bit, but then she charges right back to bring the morale of the troops back. We play with a cappella. Oh, well, is it a cappella choir? Well, it's staccato choir, whatever the case. We play with that a lot in the Banner Unfurled. And then we go into the Maid of Orleans, which is Jehanne's Crusade revised. It's the same melody, but it's like strings only, whereas like Jehanne's Crusade was, how should I say, choir also. So we go into that, so it's cool because then that happens, and then we go into the piano melody, La Victoire, was it like La Victoire? I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but basically it's French for victory. It's just kind of a cool recap of like, you did it, you came out here and you did it, you won, so it's kind of an elation coming off of that. So it's a pretty melody. And then we go into the heroine, the Heretic, which has a bit of busyness to it. The idea is she has now had influence. Her side sees her as a heroine. The enemy sees her as a heretic. She was accused of witchcraft, pretty much stuff from the get-go. So basically, the enemy sees you as the devil. The friendlies see you as a saint. So this is where Joan's character, I guess you can say saint image, starts to kind of form, or at least the foundations of it. And then we go to regaining Reims. This is taking the territory where the king is typically crowned. And so it was a strategic point to regain, because then after that they have the coronation of the Dauphin. High honors. Joan and her family get acknowledged. They become wealthy from that point. And then there's this one track, Letters to Bohemia. It takes a darker tone, because this is a part that a lot of people overlook, and this is cool because it shows some of the nuance to Jehanne, because she was ignorant. She was largely ignorant, but then she was inspired, and then she acted on that. Well, it's easy once you experience success to think that you're just in a position to know what is good and what is wrong. Well, Letters to Bohemia is a reference to letters that she dictated that was directed towards, I guess you can say, in a manner of speaking, early Protestants. Like, they weren't actual Protestants. That movement came a lot later. But the Bohemian Reformation was kind of the beginning of Protestant thought that Catholicism was withholding stuff. We want our own interpretation of Scripture. We think that the common man is capable of understanding God's Word. Things like that. So it's basically the beginnings of the idea that God can be realized by the individual outside of the Catholic Church, which is heresy, by that definition. And so Joan, she thought that the Catholic Church was where it was at, right? So she was not a fan of the Bohemians at all. She just wanted to go attack them, and she even appealed to the English to ally with them to attack them because, let's just ally and kill the heretic. I think she was thinking it was a good olive branch to maybe bring peace and an end to the 100 Years' War, to realize, hey, we got this common ground, let's go kill some heretics and it's all good. But obviously that's a dark motivation, right? And up until this point, Joan has been very pure in her motivation and very innocent. So I guess you can say that represents the threat of corruption, and that's really why I wanted to work that in there. Because then, oops, sorry, because then what happens is after this kind of goes on for a bit, she actually gets captured at Compiegne. Is it Compiegne? I don't know. My pronunciation. I'm not married to it. Feel free to correct me. Capture at Compiegne. That's when Joan gets captured. And what is awesome about this is kind of the perspective to realize that so far Joan's been true to her integrity and her purpose, right? But if she was off to go attack essentially Protestants, people that simply want to uh, not just fall in line with the Catholic Church, um, you can't punish that and still be good. Like I gotta stand by that. You cannot do that and be good. These are people that want freedom of thought, freedom of religion. I guess you can say early, like the American dream, right? But obviously, America did not exist at that time. These were good things these people wanted. And the concept of going out there and killing them for it, that's dark stuff. So, where it's cool that Joan gets captured is that she's saved from that potential corrupt outcome, right? Um, so you could say through the process of her being captured by her enemies, falsely accused, and killed, she was more prepared to meet her maker than she would have been should she had lived long enough to become corrupt. So you could say that in a way, this tragic story represents a tender mercy. I guess you can say metaphorically speaking, or literally speaking, whatever way you look at it. Joan of Arc is an interesting figure that way. So you either think there was something to her or you don't. But whatever the case, it's a good metaphor, all the same. So she's captured. There's the Inquisition, which there's cool accounts you can read of that. She had some great rebuttals. It was really hard for them to tie her down, but her Achilles heel was ultimately respecting the Catholic Church and their authority. So there was a bit of a poetic justice to this. It was she assumed the Catholic Church was infallible, right, and that they were God's presence on earth in a sense. They were his church. Well, through the course of this trial, she's shown that that's not true. And I do think she took note of that. Because ultimately her submitting to them was what got her killed. And then we get to the price of influence. By the way, like bishops were like, in a sense, paid off or loyal to the English cause. And it was a very politically motivated trial. So it was somewhat rigged to where Joan wasn't getting out of there. She even tried to escape at one point, but I didn't account for that for the sake of brevity, at least to some degree. Simplicity, I guess you could say. So we go from the price of influence to... we basically have a 3-track set here. We have Offering, Into Passing Through the Fire, and Ashes and Seine River. Offering... this is, after the verdict has landed. I guess you can say the price of influence is the verdict landing. Offering is kind of the accepting of that. In my mind, I kind of visualize her being on, I guess, the death row and walking toward the stake. That was kind of my thought. It's an a cappella choir piece, male choir. It's got some awesome moments. And then we go to Passing Through the Fire, where she is actually being killed and burned at the stake. You get a tragic sound, but it's still beautiful, but it's heavy. And honestly, I still tear up when I listen to it. I feel like I caught something good, so I'm at least happy with it. I hope you guys like it too. And then we go to Ashes and Seine River. So this was good track titling in terms of historical accuracy and such. When Joan was killed, the English influenced persons on the scene, they did not want anyone to claim that Joan had survived, was resurrected, even though burning's not going to change that. If you're going to resurrect, you're going to do it, right? But whatever the case, they didn't want anyone taking relics. They didn't want them making claims she somehow survived. So after she was killed at the stake, they burned her body again and again and again till there was very little left, and they dumped those ashes in the Seine River. And that's what that song is. It is a solo violin. It's kind of that, I guess, Schindler's List recap of how seeing how tragic what just happened was. So that's what that is making a reference to. And then we get 22 Years Gone. This was a bit different of a track. It's kind of like a montage overview, fast forward of just a lot of stuff is happening, and we're kind of zipping forward in the story. There's some busyness to it, moments I'd like, but then there's some other moments I think I probably could have done a little better. But it serves its purpose in the story, so in that respect, like, I'm still plenty happy with it. We then go to Isabelle's plea. Isabelle is Jehanne's mom. She is basically appealing to the authorities in the church to clear her daughter's name. She's been dead 22 years now. Her reputation was tainted, and Joan's mom, I think her dad was gone at this point, so it was mainly her mom and her brothers. They basically made an appeal to get her name cleared because they knew who she was. They knew she had a good heart. They knew that she loved God and that she was not guilty of what she was accused of. She was not a heretic. And so they pleaded. They wrote the right authorities, and they appealed. And so Isabelle's plea is this piano piece. It's about 7 minutes long. It's probably the longest piano piece like I've officially done. But it's just reflecting a mother's love and the desire for resolution, a desire for their child, though dead, to not be seen as a villain and not be seen out of context to who she was. So there's a beauty in that. They want her to be seen right. They want this to be set right, even though she's gone. So then we go into this track concerning a tarnished maid, which is kind of the message traveling along. So there's a bit of excitement there, the prospect of resolution. And then we come to the inquiry of Jean Brehal, who is the inquisitor assigned to investigate Joan's case, or Jehanne's case. And so he does that. It's also a piano track. It has a good tone. I'm really happy with how it turned out. This is in a sense a character outside of the main narrative, right? We only have one track for Jean Brehal, but he is an interesting and key character because he gets to sort this story out. He gets to go around, interview people. He gets to see the notes on the trial. He's in a position to really verify this. And so I wanted to have that kind of journey happen, a mystery, him not knowing what is going to be true and what's not, but he investigates it all the same. And then toward the end of the track, there's like this kind of melody that comes in and out that's kind of the influence that gets him in the right direction. And then he finds the truth. And then we go into a retrial for the dead. It's the retrial. And then the last two tracks is kind of coming to grips with the verdict landing and the Joan of Arc character being created. Because we got to realize that Joan of Arc is the saint image. It's not necessarily Jehanne. Like these are in a sense two different people. It's like comparing a person to their reputation, right? Not always the same person, but there's like common threads through it. So the martyr, the saint, is offering revised. It's a string-only version of what was a choir track. It actually sounds really pretty. I really liked it. And then we get the Joan of Arc piano piece, which I wanted to make sure was different than A Blossom in Lorraine, because in my mind, if we were going to have a track to represent who the girl Jehanne was, I think A Blossom in Lorraine is the one that does that. And Joan of Arc is the reputation. So you'll see some maybe overlap in technique, but it's different. And like there's still beauty to the Joan of Arc because it's a beautiful story, but it's also tragic, and it's also not a complete full representation of a person. It becomes the legend. And that's kind of what that reflects. And yeah, that's the journey that the album goes through. So if you've watched this far, hey, cool. I'm glad to see you're excited for the album. But yeah, I just thought I'd run you guys through that because there was a lot of thought that went into this album. There was a lot of research, and I made sure to articulate the track titles to make sure I hit the points I wanted to hit. Maybe I missed some cool opportunities. Maybe I didn't. I'm not going to say I did this perfectly, but what I will say is that I created something. It captured a lot of things I wanted to capture, and I'm very happy with it. And so with that in mind, I look forward to you guys being able to hear it, especially now that you've heard like the layout. and I really hope you like it. I'm excited, and like I've been listening to it off and on. That's some of the benefits of being the creator of a album. I guess it's a double-edged sword. If you make something you don't like, you're going to be cursed because you're going to have to listen to it again and again and drive yourself crazy. But if you do like it, then you won't mind listening to it again and again. You know, make sure you got things right and review and stuff like that. But yeah, I'm very happy with it. I'm excited to share it. And we're really close. So, yep, that is Maid of Orleans, the Maid of Orleans. A very powerful story, a very inspiring character, although there is complexity to her character. People don't often appreciate complexity in character. I mean, even right now, with a lot of political stuff going on, there's a lot of characters, such as Robert E. Lee, who are not appreciated for the complexity that was to them. They simply say, hey, you're on one side of an issue, therefore we're going to simplify your entire character. Well, guess what? Robert E. Lee was instrumental in bringing peace after the Civil War. He was reinstated as a citizen. I think a key moment where he made a big difference was he prevented further conflict. What was it? Him and Ulysses Grant met together for the surrender, and the consensus was, by God, that is enough. They didn't want to see any more shedding of blood. So even though you don't have to agree with a character on everything, you can still appreciate what they did. And Robert E. Lee was a character that ended up bringing peace. As strange as that might sound, considering he was the opponent of the Union. And Joan of Arc's like that. You know, she's like that. And the heroine, the heretic, I wanted to reflect that. The enemy saw her as a simple heretic. The allies saw her as a hero. And then later as a saint. So there's that complexity. And like I said, Letters to Bohemia, it reflects some of that complexity. There's stuff that I really admire about Joan, but there's also moments where, like, I'm kind of like, you were kind of veering off there, and Letters to Bohemia is that moment. So I think it's awesome when we can look at a character, we can appreciate their good qualities and their influence, and not necessarily agree with them on every point. And I think that's something we need to recapture about how we look at history and stories and legends, because people are complex. We're not always all good or all bad. A lot of times we're in the in-between, and that's why authors like, say, George R. Martin have got a lot of traction, because he makes great characters. He recognizes people are mixed bags. So we should really get to appreciate that, and I think if we can reflect that in art, it can teach us a lot about ourselves and others and the human condition, and hopefully that will empower us to make better choices. Because if we can recognize, I guess you can say, the negative parts of ourselves, we can improve it. We can make different choices. So yes, that's my ramble on that. We'll see where I go musically from here, but this has been a great journey. I really loved putting this album together. Like, I gotta get emotional for a moment, because this really was an incredible story to interact with, and I really, I really hope I didn't do it any disservice, because someone willing to die for what they believe in, that is an extraordinary level of courage, and you know, it's just something to look at. And so I think that it's worthy of reverence no matter where you fall on it, because even if it's someone you don't agree with or you think they're in the wrong, if they believe they are truly in the right and they're willing to die for it, you know, that you got to have reverence for that. I think even when it's your enemies, you got to respect that in your enemies, because that is some serious strength. And being able to interact with a story that has that, I just really hope I did it justice, and that this isn't diluting in any way a representation of those characteristics, because I think they are admirable characteristics. And yeah, I feel we can learn a lot from studying those types of characters. And Joan of Arc, little Jehanne from France, is definitely one of them. So yeah, I'll leave you with that. I hope you enjoyed this video. Maybe if you put it on like a ×2 or something, it'll help lessen the fact that it was basically a half-hour video. But yeah, I hope you guys will enjoy the album. Thanks for spending this time with me. I will see you around.